At my own engagement party, in front of 60 people holding champagne flutes, my future father-in-law leaned into the microphone and said, "Starting the day they marry, my son-in-law will deposit his full paycheck, every dollar of his $11,200 monthly salary, into our family account. If he refuses, there will be no wedding." The room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I looked at my girlfriend across the table. She was staring at the centerpiece like it owed her something. I set my napkin down, pushed my chair back, and walked out into the November cold. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. That call rewrote everything. But let me start earlier, because nothing about that night made sense without the 3 months that came before it. Her name was Sloane. No, wait. Her name is something I'll let you figure out from context, because where I come from, you don't throw a woman's name around when the story isn't a kind one. I'll call her my girlfriend, then my fiancée, then briefly, on paper, my wife. That's how fast things moved, and how fast they unraveled. We met at a job site outside Nashville. I was a structural inspector for a civil engineering firm. The kind of work that meant long weeks driving between bridge assessment and drainage projects across Middle Tennessee. She was doing HR paperwork for a subcontractor my company had brought on. She had a laugh that made everyone in the trailer turn around. I asked if she wanted to grab coffee after the site walk. She said yes. 8 months later, I was sitting in her parents' dining room for the first time. And the temperature in that house had nothing to do with the thermostat. Her father's name was Whitmore. Actually, no. I'm going to call him what I called him to his face for the entire time I knew him. Sir. Because that's what he demanded, and because every time I used it, I felt something in me bend a little that I should have held straight. He was the kind of man who treated every conversation like a negotiation, and every meal like a board meeting. The table could seat 12. The first night, there were 4 of us. He sat at the head with the posture of someone who'd practiced it. His wife. I'll call her his wife, because that's all she ever was in that house. A supporting role in his performance, sat to his right. My girlfriend sat beside me, and I could feel her knee bouncing under the table. We were halfway through the salad when he set down his fork and said it plainly. "You work in infrastructure, correct?" "Yes, sir. Inspections. Not design. Inspection and assessment, yes." He nodded like I'd confirmed something he'd already concluded. "And your income?" I looked at my girlfriend. She was cutting her salad into smaller and smaller pieces. "I earn well," I said. "That's not an answer." "It's the one I've got for now," I said, keeping my voice even. He smiled without warmth. "The Hargrove family has a system. Every couple in this family pools income. It goes into a shared account managed by me. It protects everyone. Stability during hardship, investment during growth. It's how we've stayed strong." "That's interesting," I said. His wife touched her water glass. My girlfriend set down her fork. "It's not a suggestion," he said. "I didn't take it as one," I said. "I took it as something you've decided. But decisions about my income are mine to make." He leaned back. My girlfriend's knee stopped bouncing. The silence was the kind that tells you you've just changed the shape of the room. Later, in the car, she reached for my hand and said, "Please don't do that again. He just needs to feel respected." "I didn't disrespect him," I said. "I just didn't agree with him." She was quiet the rest of the drive. What I noticed that night but didn't fully understand until later was her younger brother. I'd call him by his name, but he barely spoke one. He sat at the corner of the table, pouring himself a 3rd glass of wine before the entree arrived. And at one point her father gave him a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. The brother looked away fast. When I mentioned it to her that night, she said, "He's going through something. Don't ask." I didn't. I should have. The months after that were a kind of slow erosion. She was wonderful when it was just the 2 of us. We'd drive out to Percy Priest Lake on Sunday mornings, park where nobody else was, drink gas station coffee, and talk about everything that wasn't her family. She wanted to open a bakery someday. Not right away, not a big one, just something small and hers. I wanted to eventually move into bridge design, get my PE license, build something that lasted. We fit together in those quiet moments the way good things do. Without effort, without performance. But every time her family appeared, she became someone else. Quieter, smaller. She'd agree with things I knew she privately found absurd. She'd defer to her father on things that had nothing to do with him. And afterward she was always exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. I watched it happen 5, 6, 7 times before I said anything. When I finally did, when I asked her one evening why she never pushed back, not even once, she looked at me with something close to grief. "You don't understand what he's like when he's angry," she said. I've seen him irritated, I said. I haven't seen him angry. That's because I've managed it, she said. My whole life. I held her hand. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that managing someone else's anger for your whole life isn't love, it's survival. And at some point, the people you're protecting from someone's anger need to ask themselves what they're actually protecting. She proposed the engagement party 3 months into us being officially engaged. I thought it was her idea. Later, I found out her father had scheduled it before she'd even told me about it. The venue was a private dining room at a restaurant in Brentwood that her family had used for every major event going back 20 years. 60 guests, mostly her family's business contacts and social circle. My people, my parents, 2 of my college friends, my aunt who drove up from Chattanooga, were at the 2 tables farthest from the stage. I remember thinking, while I was getting dressed that morning, that something felt off. Not wrong, exactly, just tilted. Like a picture hung slightly crooked on a wall, small enough that you doubt yourself when you notice it. The dinner itself was fine until it wasn't. Her father rose from his chair between the main course and dessert. Someone handed him a microphone. I assumed he was going to make a toast. He adjusted his jacket, waited for the room to settle, and then said the thing that stopped every fork in the room. I'd like to take a moment to welcome our new son-in-law into the Hargrove family. He smiled at the room. As some of you know, we've always operated as a unit. One family, one fund, one future. And as of their wedding day, my daughter's husband will be contributing his full monthly income, $11,200, plus any bonuses, to the Hargrove family account. This is our tradition. This is how we honor the people who join us. He lifted his glass. If that arrangement doesn't suit him, he said, still smiling, the door is where it's always been. 60 people. 2 of them were my parents. I watched my father's face go from confusion to understanding to a kind of cold quiet that I recognized from childhood. It meant he was deciding whether to stand up. I looked at my fiancée. Her hands were in her lap. Her eyes were on the table. She did not look at me. I thought about what she'd said in the car 8 months ago. He just needs to feel respected. I thought about her brother, drinking his 3rd glass of wine at dinner. I thought about the way her father's look had cut across that table. I thought about the moment, 2 weeks earlier, when I'd overheard part of a phone call she didn't know I could hear. Her father's voice through the speaker. Once he's locked in, we can redirect the Clemens account. The wedding gives us cover. And her voice, soft, okay, Dad. I had recorded the last 40 seconds of it on my not because I knew what it meant yet, but because something in my gut told me to. I stood up from the table. I didn't take a microphone. I didn't make a speech. I just said, to no one in particular and everyone at once, thank you for a lovely evening. Then I walked to my parents' table, touched my father on the shoulder, and said quietly, let's go. My mother grabbed her purse without a word. She'd raised me. She knew the sound of my voice when something had been decided. We walked out through the main dining room and into the parking lot. The November air was sharp and clean and honest. My father stood next to me under the yellow light of the parking structure and said nothing for a full minute. Then, you recorded something. 40 seconds, I said. He nodded. Good. I drove my parents to their hotel and then sat in the parking lot for a long time. My phone lit up. Her name, I didn't answer. Then again, I let it go. Then a text. You embarrassed our entire family. Please come back and fix this. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the ceiling of my truck. The call I'd been half expecting came just before midnight. Unknown number. I picked up. The voice was calm, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes from experience rather than effort. Mr. Callahan? Speaking, my name is Aldrich Voss. I'm a financial crimes investigator. I've been looking into the Hargrove family account for the past 4 months. I was at your engagement party tonight, not as a guest. I think you might have something I need, and I think I might have something you need. I sat up straight. What kind of something? The kind that protects you, he said, and answers the question you've been carrying around since that dinner 8 months ago. He was right. I had been carrying it. The question was, what exactly was the family fund actually for? I met him the next morning at a diner off I-65, the kind of place with laminate menus and good coffee and enough noise to give 2 people privacy. He was already there when I arrived, a man in his mid-50s, gray suit, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, cup of coffee in front of him untouched. I sat down. He slid a folder across the table without preamble. The Hargrove family account has received pooled income contributions from 4 family members over the past 11 years, he said. 2 of them were used to cover her brother's losses. gambling, bad investments, a failed business venture. The third was her sister's husband, who contributed for 6 years until his divorce, at which point he discovered the account had less than a quarter of what he'd put in. I turned the pages, numbers, transfers, a spreadsheet with my name on a projected contribution line. The fourth is a man who married into the family 6 years ago and still believes he's building toward a jointly held investment account. He's not. The money was used to shore up a failing real estate venture her father had been concealing from his own business partners. That's fraud, I said. That's why I'm here, he said. I put the folder down. She knew. He looked at me carefully. I can't tell you what she knew. I can tell you what was discussed on certain phone calls. He pulled out his phone and played 30 seconds of audio, her father's voice. Her voice. A date from 3 weeks ago. The word contributions used 4 times. The phrase he won't ask questions used once. I sat with that for a moment. I have a recording, I said. 40 seconds from 2 weeks ago. He nodded slowly. I know. I need it. I sent it to him across the table. He listened to it through his earpiece, nodded again, and said, "That's the piece we were missing." The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. I didn't answer her calls. I did answer my attorney's calls. A woman I'd used once before to review a contractor dispute, who turned out to have exactly the combination of patience and sharpness the situation required. I gave her everything, the recording, the folder Aldrich had shown me, a timeline I typed out at 2 in the morning sitting at my kitchen table. She read all of it and said, in the dry, precise tone I'd already come to appreciate, "You didn't sign anything." "No, the marriage license wasn't filed yet." "No, then legally you're in a clean position. Let's keep it that way." 4 days after the engagement party, Aldrich called to tell me that the family account had been frozen pending investigation, that her brother was cooperating with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure, and that her father had hired 3 attorneys in the past 48 hours. The real estate venture had been insolvent for over a year. The engagement party announcement had been designed, his word not mine, designed, to lock in my income contribution before the investigation became public. I had walked out of my own engagement party 12 minutes before the window closed. I thought about calling her. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the lake on Sunday mornings and the bakeries she wanted and the way she laughed when her guard was down. I thought about 40 seconds of audio and the phrase "he won't ask questions." I sent her one message. It said, "I hope you find a way out of that house that doesn't cost someone else everything." She didn't respond for 3 days. When she finally did, it was a long message that started with anger and ended somewhere quieter. She said she'd known about the brother, but not the full scope. She said she'd told herself it was temporary. She said she was sorry. She said the last part in a way that felt like she meant it, which is the only reason I still think about her without bitterness. I don't know what happened to her after that. I know her father surrendered his house January. I know the brother testified. I know the man who'd been contributing for 6 years got a partial settlement. I learned all of this secondhand from Aldrich, who called me twice more with updates, and then went quiet the way investigators do when a case moves into hands other than theirs. What I kept, after all of it, was simpler than I expected. My attorney called me on a Tuesday morning in February, 6 months after the engagement party. It was raining in Nashville, the flat gray kind of rain that turns the city into a watercolor. She told me the final paperwork had cleared, that there was nothing outstanding, that I was legally, financially, entirely free. I thanked her. She said, "You did one smart thing in all of this, you know." "What's that?" "You hit record." I hung up and sat for a while in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. The rain tapped against the window. Somewhere outside, traffic moved through the wet streets, ordinary and indifferent. I thought about the dinner table 8 months ago, the question about my income, the answer I'd held back. My father called that evening. We talked for a long time. At some point he said, "You know what your grandfather used to say about foundations? Tell me." He said you can dress a cracked foundation with all the marble you want. It still cracks. He paused. He was a mason. He knew cracks. I laughed. First real laugh in a while. A month later, I transferred to my firm's Knoxville office. New city, same work, and something about moving through unfamiliar streets felt like a clean page rather than an empty one. I spent weekends driving the mountain roads up toward Gatlinburg, stopping at overlooks, watching the ridges run west in long blue waves. One morning, I hiked out to a bridge assessment on a narrow creek road outside Maryville. A single-span steel bridge from 1961, 48 feet long, scheduled for replacement the following spring. I walked it alone in the early light, my clipboard under my arm, noting the surface corrosion on the lower chord, the slight heave in the east abutment where the soil had shifted. It was good, honest work, the kind where what you see is what there is. I wrote in my report that the bridge had held its load rating, with no significant compromise, despite 63 years of service. I recommended replacement as planned, but noted no immediate safety concern. Then I stood there for a while after I'd written it, watching the creek move fast and brown below, carrying the last of the winter runoff toward the valley. Standing on something solid that had been built right the first time does something to a person. It's quiet, but it stays. I don't think about the engagement party the way I used to. When I do think about it, what I remember most is the moment before I stood up. The fraction of was deciding whether to stay seated and wait for someone else to fix it, or to trust that standing up was the right thing even without knowing how it would end. I stood up. That's the only part I'd change nothing about. Everything else, the confusion, the loss, the strange, flattened grief of watching something fall apart that you'd wanted to last, all of that took time to settle. But standing up took no time at all. Some things you know before you know them. You just have to trust your legs.